We are so pleased to have our guests here today from the North Dakota Engine Farms and from Mike, who's the CEO of the Colorado-Wyoming Engine. And the goal today is to hear from them about the process of writing their proposals and to allow you guys to ask them some questions directly. So I'm Kimberly Zarecor. I'm one of the program directors for the Engines program, and my home base when I'm not at NSF is Iowa State. So I'm happy to be here for our Midwest Roadshow. And I'm going to have Kathy and Mike introduce themselves. I also, when I asked their first question, and I also want to remind everyone that the questions in the Q&A should really be directed to our speakers, not general program questions. We're happy to take those, and we'll put some information in the chat about how to do that at our Engines email address. But today, the focus should really be on Kathy and Mike. So I'm going to start with Kathy, and I'm going to ask the question, and please introduce yourself in the context of the question. So how did you get involved with an NSF Engines proposal, and what first steps did your team take to start building your coalition?
Wow. Okay, that's a loaded one, and we'll try to keep it short here because obviously building a coalition is a big journey for the group. I came into the group actually as a subcontractor post the virtual site visit, but before the physical site visit in location. And I was brought in for a number of reasons, but primarily to bring the groups together for strategic planning and working through that. I'm a North Dakota native. I grew up on a farm. I worked with a lot of the core partners that have come together. So it was a natural fit for me to come in and work with the team and start to build that group. The group itself, though, had already been together for a year, right? So I was a year into the project when they came together, and they came together through NDSU as our prime, North Dakota State University, which is a land grant university. They're an agricultural university, and they had worked with NSF previously and knew about the proposal engine proposal that was in flight. They worked closely with the core partners that finally came together and kind of inspired a conversation about how do we drive momentum on some of the technology and innovation for agriculture. At that point, they had put the proposal together with 4 core partners, so statewide partners: the Chamber, the Economic Development Group, the Grand Farm, which is a nonprofit that works with agricultural testing, and then NDSU. And they had come together through lots of conversations. And for context, North Dakota is a small state, deeply community-based, deeply connected from state government down. So a lot of these groups of people had worked together on lots of economic development activities across the state. It very quickly became something that the groups were very excited about. And they coalesced and got really into deep conversations about how is it that we take what is a natural context for our region, agriculture, and really advance the story in a way that could globally impact food security and cultural connection. What happened during that conversation is there's you'll notice the deep conversation with DEIA and bringing diversity and underserved populations, et cetera. And in the state of North Dakota, we have a deep tribal connection with our nine tribal nations, but 5 tribal colleges that were not at that initial table. And in that conversation, it very quickly shifted. And the dialogue became about how is it that we can talk about agriculture from First Nation status all the way through technology and taking the deep legacy of agriculture from the state and embed it, not just use it as a pillar, but be the foundational culture. And this group really got into that. And so when I came in, they had already set that foundation and added the North Dakota Tribal College System into that core partner group. And it was that group that came together to really drive the proposal and has stayed connected as the core partner group post-award.
Great. Thank you so much. That's a really, really fantastic start for us. So, Mike, the same thing. Introduce yourself and tell us how you got involved with the engines proposal and what first steps your team took to start building your coalition.
Thanks, Kimberly. My name is
Yeah.
Mike Freeman. So I'm the CEO of NSF Ventures. We're a 501c3 science and technology incubator and the lead organization for the NSF Engines proposal. A little bit different how our team came together. So NSF has been working in the science and technology ecosystem, federal labs, universities for many, many years. And we led a proposal to the Economic Development Administration Build Back Better program and got to the finals. And that's what really, I think, got our coalition around climate technologies really moving in high gear, I would say. Unfortunately, we got to the finals, didn't win that. But really, I think in the scheme of things, realized that the NSF Engines proposal was really the one that was more impactful for what we're trying to do anyway. So we really didn't have a regrouping process. The universities, the corporations, the colleges, community colleges really just came together under the NSF proposal. It's quite easy to transition. I would agree with Kathy that the coalition building, if you've not already done a lot of this work, can be a real challenge on these projects. And let me stop there because I think the similarities with with farms is in Colorado, Wyoming is quite similar. That we had already initiatives underway for multiple years.
All right, great. So, Mike, let's follow up with you. So, what did you consider when you selected the lead organization? You said something about Inosphere, but maybe give us a fuller picture of that. And how did this relate to the region of service? So, for example, how do you end up with partners in Wyoming, since you guys are based in Colorado? And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and Kimberly, that kind of goes back to coalition building. So Inosphere had been supporting the University of Wyoming for many, many years, more than a decade. And so that was a natural fit for us. And they're really the R&D university for the state. So that made sense from an engines proposal perspective. I think the credibility that Inosphere gained leading the Build Back Better proposal helped a lot, although it wasn't the deciding factor in who should lead the proposal. When the Build Back Better coalition, let's call it, morphed into the NSF Engine coalition, my assumption at that point, because we had never done NSF related contracting, is that we probably weren't the logical choice. And I very deliberately stepped out of the conversation for a couple of months to let all the institutions that would be potentially the logical lead for the engine have a dialogue without the industry involved, because we were already collaborating with all of them already and had a unique relationship that had been built up over many years. I think that was the right strategy. And I think in the first round of the engines, it was quite apparent in the BAA and all the lead up that non-traditional, let's call them organizations, would be welcome to apply. I think saying that and sort of being one that now is working with NSF is quite a large leap still. It was a very significant learning curve for us to learn the NSF culture and language around the proposals and the teams and just the heritage and the history that just wasn't in this year's background. So that was, I think, maybe a helpful discussion of a non-traditional lead and how that process evolved. I'll stop there, Kimberly.
Yeah, sure. So can I ask you just for a couple of details? Was there something that you guys did as a lead organization, resources that you accessed, or anything that you did in particular that you felt was really helpful to get more acclimated to the NSF vocabulary and culture?
Yeah, well, I think well, when I say I think, because this is like almost 2 years ago now, all this started. But our long standing tradition incubating science and technology companies is such a critical part of an engine, advancing R&D to translation. We weren't a workforce organization. That's something we're learning. But we had those two pillars really down in a long history. And I think once we really started imagining the outcome of the engines project, the economic development aspects of it are so core. And that's fundamentally what Inosphere does, and has done for many years. And then we really augmented our lack of expertise, I'd say, with NSF, with our university partners, who again we've been working with for more than 2 decades in most cases. And so they put critical people on the team to really help us with the NSF specific gaps in knowledge that we have.
That's great. And I think that's really good advice for a non-traditional lead, is to use your resources in your network, right? So I applaud you guys for figuring that out kind of quickly. So Kathy, what about you guys? So you came in you said maybe in year 2 of developing this, but what were the considerations when you thought about the lead organization as a team? And then how did you develop your region of service in relation to that?
First of all, a region of service, just for everyone on the phone, is North Dakota. So we have the entire state of North Dakota, which is deeply connected by our university systems, which is a land grant, like I said before, et cetera, that are all kind of have a deep root in agriculture. So it was a natural kind of fit that way for continued conversations. It's interesting listening to Mike, because we came in with the traditional kind of a program lead, which was the university, and then fought really hard to be non-traditional. So we were looking at it from a different perspective. So we took that foundational kind of a perspective of North Dakota State being fluent in NSF speak and processes and that operational context, and said that's a good foundation for the team, but then worked really hard at looking at what we needed to accomplish from an outcomes perspective, that we're going to take non-traditional partners. Hence the conversation that started with the tribal college systems, with the chamber, with EDC, with nonprofit associated with innovation and creativity, and bringing that group together. And they're just our core, because we have a large group of key stakeholders that sit on top of that as well, that are industry based, that are deep in agriculture, et cetera. So we looked at, let's put an operational context that will help us kind of run the operational, and then really spend the effort on those core partnerships with the outcomes that we were trying to accomplish, which was to drive momentum and innovation that would solve food systems, right? And that is well beyond the scope of just university research arms. So we've worked the opposite of Mike. I was kind of listening to the
So I have 2 points that I want you to drill down a little bit into for us. So one is, you come from the world of small business associations, right? So you have a national role in women in business. And can you say a little bit about that in relation to the engine, and how that background that you have, what you bring as an interesting partner for the group, or they brought you to the table? And Mike talked about the incubators, the role of incubators as Inosphere itself doing that work. So you yourself are bringing something that maybe is an unusual skill set to the engine that people would be interested to hear about. And the other part of this that we have a question about is, very specifically, how did you build the relationships with the tribal partners? And so I think North Dakota's maybe, as you said, unusual because you were able to go to the Tribal College Council.
right.
But could you give some of our participants just some ideas of activities? Did you visit? Did you do workshops? What were the actual operational ways that you got to know your potential tribal nations partners?
Well, thank
So
you
those
for
are
the
2
question.
things. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And they kind of tie together. So they're a good kind of mix in regards to that. So thank you for the questions. So I can do a little advertisement for small businesses, because I'm a big advocate for that. So I'll take it anytime. There's one, I have a very long history in big tech, right? So I spent a lot of my career in technology. So as a chief innovation officer, I'm using that kind of process work for kind of bringing together distinct and diverse groups to talk about innovation in a different way. So there's that kind of bend. But my passion point, the National Women's Business Council and women's business centers are really about economic parity and building opportunities for underserved communities to engage in business and economic development in their communities. Because small businesses are really kind of directed at the community level. If you look at Main Street and you took away all the small businesses, you would not have a Main Street in rural North Dakota, right? We're a small state based on rural kind of activities. So that connection is a dialogue that we have. So when we talk about diverse communities within our farms organization, our operations, it is an embedded cultural part of what we're talking about as it relates to solving not just food security at the big tech level, but local food droughts, localized communities, local kind of engagements, which brings the strength of our tribal college systems to play. So there's just a really lovely fit. They are set geographically across our state. They are deeply embedded in agriculture economies and life, and they bring that historical kind of presence, and they invest in it, right? Because they're solving for food droughts in their own communities, just as we are across the rural landscape. So that connection is interesting. Our CEO, newly named CEO, Holly Mackey, is Northern Cherokee, so she brings a deep connection to the kind of agricultural history. We have one board governance board member who is from one of our tribal colleges, and then we've got several other kind of connections, and they are driving greenhouses, vertical land management, bison initiatives, etc., that are really connected to our overall emerging research. So those strong connections have embedded kind of the dialogue, so that it's not a standalone experience, it's just a part of the outcomes that we're trying to accomplish. You can tell we get a little passionate about it, but this it's great. We've got great connections and engage in a way that is driven by the needs of communities. So it's that place-based kind of experience and really being serious about it. So it starts at those local communities within our tribes, within our rural landscape, and it goes out towards the outcomes versus us picking outcomes and going in, I think is a big part of that.
Great, thanks. And I'm actually going to have Mike give us a different perspective on that. You guys also have Tribal Nations partners in your engine. Can you talk a little bit about how that develops? North Dakota has this big apparatus of the tribal colleges that helps, but maybe you guys built that relationship, in terms of the questions that are coming from the audience. This is one that people are interested in.
Yeah, and I vowed to tell you the good and bad of our proposal. Be really transparent about it. We're very well situated in Wyoming with the tribal communities because the University of Wyoming runs a long-standing program that connects to the tribal communities there. There isn't the equivalent in Colorado, and we've been back on our heels since day one, really trying to figure out the right collaboration network. There are multiple tribal nations across both states that span into other states. It's been a bit complicated, and I think this is an area, if I could rewind the tape to our proposal, I don't think we really fully appreciated the amount of time it would take when you don't have the natural connectivity to the tribal communities. It's not something you just build overnight. And you're hearing from Kathy, this deep embeddedness. I don't know, that might be more similar to regions on this call, but that's an area I would have spent a lot more time on. And I wouldn't say that we did it extremely well.
And I'll just add, Kimberly, to Mike's comments. We are testing our engagement model all the time too, because it's challenging, right? And it's not just tribal. We've got new Americans, we've got veterans, we've got women in business, we've got large groups of people that we have to check that we're engaging in the right way every single time. So we keep going back. When you get to the challenges, when you get back to the coalition of bringing such a diverse group of people and perspectives together, don't underestimate the time, capacity, and dollars that's going to take in your proposal. We did. So
that's great. Thanks. And we do have quite a few questions in the Q&A so far have been about these kind of coalitions. So Mike, why don't I ask you one that's in here specifically? So what specific types of support and what amount, although you don't have to give exact dollars, from local government partners do you guys have? And in an engine with a multi-state region of service, how do you balance the needs of the different states in terms of output and measuring impacts, to understand the difference between Colorado and Wyoming, for example, even though the geographies are tight, they're different places, right, when it comes to metrics. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let me start with the states, because I think this, to the extent that there may be applicants working on multi-state proposals, I think I would start there. And Colorado and Wyoming, from literally a political perspective, are quite different. But I think as I've really come to understand and appreciate how two states and two current governors that don't politically align us on clean energy and climate technologies can get along and work on a proposal like this is an amazing thing. And it is a bit trite to say that when you have differences of opinion, it produces a better outcome. I think there's no question about this. We have to be thoughtful every day about how we communicate about this project, what the goals of the states are that overlap and are different. But it frankly makes us better in execution and delivery, and it will over time. So I would say, to the extent that you may be, thinking of a multi-state effort, I would not let that dissuade you. You can 100% work around it. Now, the reality is, like many Midwest states, as Wyoming is a relatively low population state, has lots of rural areas, looks more similar to Western Colorado and Eastern Colorado. So when you think about this regional service concept, you absolutely have to think through the differences of urban rural in our context. But the glue we think that really holds the coalition and the engine together ultimately is working through the land grant universities that have physical presences in every county through extension, one, and then the community college systems being connected out to all parts of both states. That is really, really important collaboration that's already been built up, but that's from an execution standpoint, we're really thinking about that. Great question on local government support. So our topic is around climate related technologies. And as it happens, many local governments across the United States, counties included, have what they would call climate action plans or something similar. And they're going to really run the gamut from things in rural communities are more maybe air quality or even soil focused, to urban areas that might be very focused on greenhouse gas reduction and alternative energy. And they kind of have to understand the spectrum. So, climate resiliency in terms of the outcome of this engine is the goal. And that's going to happen in a physical place and is place-based. And so we've been quite fortunate to be able to, tap into the local government interests around climate planning, let's call it. And many local governments in Colorado, at least, they're a little bit farther along just in terms of their climate plans, actually have dedicated funding for their projects. And so we can tap into that for a cost share and for specific projects over time. So let me stop there and see if I answered that question, Kimberly.
Yeah, I think that's great. Maybe a big kind of headline question would be, did you get cash infusion from either state?
Both states, cash, and then local governments, they're going to be project-based, but actually we really prefer project-based cost share than just contribution, if you will, mainly because the cost shares are much larger and the projects will have much larger impact than, I'm just making a number up, if a city said, hey, we're going to throw 50,000 in just to support you to get your project up and running. We're going the exact opposite. Let me take Denver, for example. They're trying to really bring their long-term energy and climate models together, which interestingly enough, you would intuitively think those things connect. They actually don't. And so as a major project, we're working now with NREL and NOAA, who maintain these, probably the most sophisticated energy and climate models. And we're having dialogue with them now about how do we integrate these models so that at the local level, you can better plan for your energy and climate future, whatever that looks like in your region. So that is a large scale, large impact project, assuming we can bring those together. That's much more interesting for us.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So Kathy, what about you guys? How do you think about local governments? How do you think about the state government? And I know you have Grant Farms as part of your project, which is has a piece that I think that comes from the state investment. And so can you talk a little bit in particular in North Dakota? And I want to add a detail to that question. You know, Fargo is a 2-state metro. And so how does Minnesota figure into your thinking, even though your region of service is North Dakota? How do you work with some of your partners that themselves span across that? The 2 states?
That this one's not an easy one, right? Because we are debating regional versus region of service versus outcome. So we're always having this kind of dialogue because we have a very strong connection to Montana with our Montana partners. We have a strong connection with South Dakota with our South Dakota partners. We've got obviously University of North Dakota in North Dakota that we're working with. So we've kind of the region, and then we're trying to kind of, it's complicated. Let me just put it that way. You're going to have to do a lot of work in kind of managing kind of those activities. We actually have less kind of connection to Minnesota, even though we're right on the boundary, on the border with that, in the sense of kind of the agricultural intent is more similar to South Dakota and Montana than it is to Minnesota currently on the research projects that we're working with. Our state engagement is close and connected in regards to project outcomes, but similar to Mike, we are really looking at kind of the funding kind of portal connections and leverage as an outcome experience versus just a general operational kind of intent purpose. So when we've got research projects that we're looking at shared investment across our research partners, our industry partners who are coming in, we might have large industry players who want something, a challenge specifically kind of engaged in our R&D that would be a shared kind of funding model as well. So we're thinking about it much more like that than we are about kind of general kind of state or local kind of funding models that way. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's like,
Yeah.
It's one that if we could start earlier, we would probably start more defined about how those outcomes are connected to a region of service. It's just hard when you're in industries like this that cross over a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the region of service and the new solicitation, we have some additional language around that. So for the participants, you want to read the solicitation carefully on that topic, just to understand a little bit about the thinking on the NSF side. So there's also a question here that I want to put to you, Kathy. So can you speak to cradle through career workforce development and the broader impacts piece of your engine? So I know Mike mentioned that the workforce piece is a bit new to them. I think probably because of your university coalitions, this part feels more comfortable maybe for you guys, or you already were doing it. So can you talk a little bit about that?
I'd love
Cradle to career, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to bring Jenna, who's sitting in our startup right over there, onto the story, and she'll maybe pop over here. We are deeply embedded, she's looking at, deeply embedded in a workforce being an integrated conversation to our research, or our use-based or community-based kind of research, so that it's holistically thought about, right? So we're not just we're recruiting people into the state to do ag. We're upskilling, recruiting, attracting, retaining, all of the things that you do with workforce for the specific outcomes that we're trying to engage in. So one, contextually, that's how we're thinking about it, and working through on it. The second part of it is that we had the chamber, who is our workforce lead, is deeply at the state level involved in workforce engagement across the state already. So we brought that skill into farms, and we're leveraging it against agriculture, which was not one of the primary sectors, ironically, in the model prior to this. So that was we just assume we can fill ag jobs when in fact that's not really the case. And working through it. And then second, we're working on focus. So we are, so the cradle to career kind of upskilling in these first 2 years, we're really focused in on kind of where we want those outcomes. We'll expand those programs to engage a larger portfolio, but we are really, one of the challenges we're trying to do is pick the scope of what we're working on and the outcome that we're trying to get to and getting to success. Because our t-shirts say get to 3, right? We want outcomes that are kind of viable and related to that. So the chamber had won the Good Jobs Challenge, which came out of I think the CHIPS Act as well. And so we had an infrastructure base that we could leverage that was not being applied to agriculture. So we had an up on that is helpful. I don't know if that
Great.
answered your question.
Yeah, wonderful. Mike, I'm going to put the same question to you and also link it to the incubator piece of this. So you had a lot of experience as an organization doing incubator work, but you didn't have the workforce expertise in-house. So can you just talk about the process of like getting familiar with that, how you think about cradle to career as a pathway, and then how you were able to use your experience in the incubator space to kind of push you forward into the workforce development part of the project?
Yeah, these are pretty straightforward answers, I believe, because you know, I think every engine's got to do some amount of work of entrepreneurial education. We're very squarely focused still on that at NSF in terms of our role leading the proposal. We decided very early on we were not going to try to build particular workforce expertise inside the new engine, that we're going to work through partners. And really day one decided that, similar to Kathy, you talked about the chamber. Our core area is the community college systems of both states, and then the Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation, which is, one of the, longest standing regional economic development organizations in the country, and, oftentimes looked at as a regional model. So that was a pretty easy decision to just say, hey, we've got tons of workforce expertise out there. We're going to tap in to all the partners and fund them, from the engine perspective. Now, one thing that's slightly different maybe than Kathy, what you're dealing with farms, we think the industry that's emerging around the measurement of climate change, which is really a monitoring and a data issue at heart, is a new industry. And so this is quite challenging when you don't have NAICS codes and other data that's really set up very cleanly to try to even understand and characterize the underlying current workforce. I mean, you could, for example, look at computer science. So that's a piece of it. Advanced computing is a piece of it. Data analytics, a piece. So this is a real challenge that we don't know 100% what the answer is, although we're going through this characterization of workforce right now. But when you think about a practical level, what does it take to grow an industry that's largely going to be hardware and software based? You go to models that sort of already out there, say, okay, here's how these industries evolved and the workforce planning around them. But it's not quite as easy as saying, hey, there's an existing well-identified workforce and industry that couple, and you sort of go forward. So my guess is maybe other engines will be struggling with this, and it is a data problem at its core. I mean, the data doesn't come to to a region in the way you want it, obviously.
Yeah, I think we also know of that challenge on our side too. NAICS codes are part of the request now for the next round to help us kind of categorize some of that question of what kind of jobs there will be. So I'm going to pose a question that's come in through the Q&A first to Mike and then to Kathy. I'm not sure in either case you guys have a strong piece of this, but there's somebody here from a smaller university. So they're wondering how a small university could engage in the engines program. And if you have, from your respective teams, worked with smaller universities, let's say more teaching focused, not research focused institutions, and also not necessarily a community college or part of a tribal system, but just a small college. So do you have partners like that, and what role can they play, and how do people build that relationship with you guys?
Well, maybe I'll answer that just real quick, because I think mine's going to be a relatively short answer. There's not that many small colleges in our region. So in terms of who to collaborate with, it wasn't like there were 10 or 15 sitting around, that weren't already connected. So I would say that we didn't deliberately think of a small college partnering arrangement, mainly because there's not that many of them. And it wasn't obvious, the handful that there are, how they would tie in. And so, even, kind of post-award, I think the only higher education institution that well, there's one university that just, I think in the time and the time crunch of putting the proposal together, you can't bring everybody in you want. And so there was one university where like, hey, let's just wait and see if we are successful with this. We'll loop back with you. And that's what we're doing now. My guess is we'll add a couple of educational partners as we go, but we're also pretty well set in both states in terms of the logical collaborators.
Okay, great. And Kathy, what about you guys?
Well, one, I agree with Mike that this will continue to evolve, right, as you're going down the path, and we'll add partners as we go. We do have actually a couple small colleges that are sitting in our sub-awardee with definitive outcomes attached to them. And they're primarily sitting within the context of the research, community-based research, and workforce education, and working through it, because within our rural landscape, we have a lot of small colleges that are engaging the communities around them, and they're deeply kind of a connection point. So when you have a geography as big as North Dakota that has lots of miles between people, you need to have those satellites that really are kind of connecting us to our entire region of service. So that's one of the places that small kind of educational kind of places that are community based really make a big impact to what we're trying to accomplish. As coming in as a lead or a prime against, then that would be a scope thing. I would be really, thinking about what it is you were trying to accomplish and what kind of scope that would take.
Yeah, can you also say a little bit about, Kathy, community colleges, what role they play for you guys? That's another question that's come in, not just small colleges, but community colleges.
Community, probably the three things. One, community engagement, right? In a large landscape, having trusted individuals within communities who can be the center of that conversation. Coalitions take a lot of dialogues, take a lot of conversations, take a lot of kind of engagement and working. So that's a really strong component to it. In our case, we've got, kind of evolving workforce to Mike's point. This is stuff that doesn't exist, and our community and smaller colleges are more fluid and have probably some flexibility and trying kind of educational things. We're going to do one of those in our tribal colleges because it's a small group of teachers and professors who can engage a different way of thinking about education. And then three, bringing different perspectives, right? We're solving for food drought in those areas, and why would we assume to know that? And so we're looking for those engagement kind of models. So that's how we're thinking about it.
Great. So maybe Mike, just a quick response on the community colleges, and then we got a big rush of questions here at the end. We're probably not going to get to all of them, but I know you guys have a big community college piece, and then I'll transition to a last question for each of you.
Yeah, and mine's easy. It's workforce. I mean, we have very ambitious goals around training, students and individuals in the rural environments of both states, and we think that's really the only practical way to offer a lot of workforce programming.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, so I'm going to try to capture a few questions that have come in with maybe a broader question. So people are asking about how the TRL scale fits into your engine, and a little bit about the success metrics for the first 2 years. So can you talk a little bit about how you think of a 10-year project? I'll start with Mike. It's a 10-year project, but it's a cooperative agreement with a budget for the first 2 years. So you have to set some goals for yourselves as an engine in those first 2 years. Can you talk about the research piece of that, and just more generally, how do you know you are being successful? How does the team define that in these first 2 years in particular?
Well, that is a big question. I'll try to go short because that's probably 30 minutes right there. so in terms of the strategy on research is really tapping into what I would just call the centers at the universities that are already doing substantial work in the technology areas of interest to the engine. So that's number one, because these are already set up. There's faculty working, there's commercialization happening. And so one thing we proposed is a grant program from that the engine will make grants using NSF funding for research and development and translation. We're pretty close to submitting that to NSF for approval. So that's one way we think we can move technologies, from the bench into the market a little bit quicker. And then around metrics of success, they're very broad based. In workforce, it'll be interns placed, apprenticeships placed, it'll be retention of those folks in jobs, and then a lot around workforce and economic impact. I mean, this is a very, very deep question. But I'd say our metrics really span across across the engine's depth of programmatic impact. Rural engagement, for example, students that might not normally have internship and apprenticeship opportunities. I mean, this is a whole DEI lens, inclusive excellence piece of this. A lot of stuff that we'll be kind of monitoring and managing.
All right, Kathy, what about you?
I ditto to everything Mike said. It's a big conversation and work that goes with it. A couple things for people writing proposals. Start thinking about this earlier than later, right? So start to think about really defining what it is you want to accomplish and what partners you need, and then what outcomes look like for you in working it. To your TRL kind of research, same as Mike, we had some deeply kind of embedded university research that was over not just our local universities, but a network of universities as it related to ag. We chose those that needed deeper industry connections. That was the uplift to this, because the feedback we were getting was industry wasn't getting in there fast enough and deep enough to influence kind of the commercialization of it. So a lot of our work is on that kind of engagement model and working it through. And so those outcomes are based on a short term, how do we get the foundation set for that? And then mid and long term will get us into years 3 and beyond, kind of roadmap and stuff on that. So really start early, get defined, and then figure out your challenge point and where you can make the difference. And we thought it was the intersection between capital, industry, and research. And so that's kind of our sphere of activity. And then deeply embedded in that emerging research stuff that doesn't get funded. So that's a whole nother arm. And we figured out quickly that they're two different things, right? So there's the in-flight kind of big tech, kind of big ag story, and then there's a whole story of really meaningful research that gets kind of left on the table because it doesn't neatly fit within those cogs. So that's the work that's we're at the earlier stages. TRL, we're defining it as a group as we speak, trying to fit within the model of NSF, but also it's good because it's making us really think about where are we at in the path on kind of the work we're doing.
Hey, Kimberly, just one more thing on data and outcomes. I would strongly suggest anybody that gets into the application process bring an economist in pretty quickly. I mean, we did that a little bit later in the game, although that's funny because that's kind of at our industry's core is impact and reporting metrics. But because the whole question of how do you report outcomes fundamentally becomes a data question of what's existing. And then what, frankly, do you have to produce and create over time? And that is not necessarily a simple question. So I would just highly recommend that. I think we did it like midstream, and I would have done it way earlier, just doing it again.
Great. So I want to end on one last final small question. So there's been some questions around how to get involved in an engine. And if you're not already part of a team, how do you get involved? How do you make an introduction? So can you quickly just say, Mike, when someone approaches you at the engine who wants to get involved, what are some considerations that you have? And what do they need to know? Like, what can they tell you that's helpful for you to figure out whether they'd be a good partner or not?
Well, I think for us, it would start with alignment around a pretty specific and more narrow topic than clean tech. And it has to start in the topic area. And then from there, it will be, are you additive? I mean, that sounds overly simplistic, but we've got just an enormous amount of inbound, interest. And mainly it's coming from individuals that want to mentor companies. Okay, we've got hundreds of those people already, don't need you. We've got a lot of people thinking we're project developers and we're going to finance, actual projects. So we're getting better, I'd say, week to week at being really clear about, when you reach out to engage, what are sort of the options you have, and the number one thing after the topic areas, are you additive?
Great. And Kathy, what about you?
Same. This is one that ask yourself those questions. What if so-and-so asks us to engage, and start practicing what does that sound like? Because the influx of kind of activity is pretty deep, and you do have to start to get really good at kind of shuffling through that. And it takes time. And so start to practice that early in your proposal on who would be additive, who would engage, who would be great for your outcome and working it. We are trying to get better at it every day, because all the topics are fun. Who doesn't want to have a conversation about all of these topics? But you have to start to really scope, really kind of identify where is it that's engagement, because we can't meet with 100 startup entrepreneurs that may not be the next experience. So we have to really kind of put it in play. That one is you just getting your additive questions on a list and identifying those who can help sort for you is
Great.
also, and make it not just one person.
Yeah, I think not one person wants to have to go through all those email contacts info. Thank you guys so much. It's really been a wonderful conversation. I know all the participants learned so much from you, and we appreciate your time. And thank you for joining us.